Hi, everybody. What a pleasure to be here at the Compassion Consortium as ever, and also to be introducing Zehra Abbas. You can read about her at length, and oh my goodness, this woman has so much going on. It is pretty astounding. Zehra is involved with a million things, and she actually started her philanthropic life in human rights. And as a very young person, she didn't shy away from the scary stuff. She was working with the Canadian Center for Victims of Torture and War Against Rape in Pakistan. And I mean, just she was really out there for people. And now she has opened up and she is there for people and animals and the planet and all there is. So, with everything in your background and the fact that you really did start in human rights and human issues, what do you say to people who are convinced that animal people don't care about humans?
Well, in my experience, and really I can just speak to my personal experience, I find that many animal folks have actually arrived to caring for animals when they've already had a history of caring for humans. There's already a sense of accountability, responsibility, compassion, and care that is, it's just something that we need to tap into, but lives amongst almost all of us. The concept of empathy and the neuroscience of empathy. We know that, even children experience empathy, babies experience empathy. And so, really, it's just a matter of, um, I think, perhaps communicating in our advocacy uh, how much human rights impacts animal rights as well. When humans are stressed out and feeling like they don't know where their next meal is coming from, or they're stressed out about things that are happening in the world that are really quite dramatic and almost unnatural for us to be experiencing. There's a tremendous amount going on in the world right now. When we go online, we're overwhelmed with how many things there are. That can sometimes sadly drive down empathy. That's just how the neuroscience of the brain works, as far as I've learned. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've spent a lot of time trying to understand what the hang up is, like how come more people don't jump on board as soon as they learn that animals are hurting. And really, that's my conclusion, is there are a number of factors, and we just have to be mindful of that as advocates so that we can be more effective.
Well, I do want to cycle back into the neuroscience of empathy, which is something we've never touched on, and it's so fascinating. But first, I think everybody would like to get to know you. So it seems from what I've learned about you that you have a philanthropic story and a vegan story, and maybe they're the same, or maybe you need to tell us two stories to tell us about who you are.
Absolutely. I'll give you a quick summary and rundown. I was 18 when I dropped out of university. I was studying business admin, and it wasn't it wasn't feeding my soul the way I needed school to feed my soul. I actually really enjoyed school, and I wasn't enjoying economics, and I'd go to Toronto and walk around instead of going to class. And so, and I have such a wonderful mom. She encouraged me to really find what I wanted to do. And so I took some time to just work. And in that gap year, I ended up traveling to Pakistan, which is where I was born, where I'm from ethnically. I went to Pakistan for my cousin's wedding, and I went on a 3-week ticket, but ended up staying for 8 months. I started volunteering. I was reading a load of books. It was really my cousin who opened my eyes to what the lives of people struggling with poverty can be like. And the more I learned, the more empathic I became, the more I wanted to get engaged and involved. And I started volunteering at places like War Against Rape, and I came back a very changed person. I studied advertising only because in post-secondary, only because I didn't really know what to do with my life. And I was trying to comprehend why people didn't seem to care as much as my cousin cared or other folks that I was seeing who were volunteering their lives away. How come they care so much? But so many of us are consumed with, what fashion we're going to buy next. And in order to understand that, I thought, well, let me study advertising and see what I can learn. As a teenager, I worked in malls and I thought, this commerce, the way we consume, if we could just, dampen this a little bit, I think we might have space for other things. And so I was really quite young and lost and didn't really know what to do. And studying advertising ended up being fantastic because I started a youth nonprofit right after graduating. And marketing, advertising, the skills I had learned ended up playing a key role in us being able to mobilize as a community group. We ended up building a nonprofit community hub that under the logo said humans, animals, planet, because we aim to be good for humans, animals, and the environment. However, we were selling organic cheese and organic milk and organic eggs and organic chicken that was halal and hand slaughtered and all the good stuff that's supposed to be humane. So we believed. And once I learned what that really means, we had no choice but to change our model to being a plant-based community hub. Community Hub Cafe. I don't know if I mentioned that part. I am fasting. And
Yes,
so it's Ramadan. And so I feel like it's the tail end. We open our fast in about a couple of hours. And
yes.
so I feel like my brain's a little bit slow. So please forgive me if I forget to mention certain things.
No, you don't sound slow at all. And when I look at all these things you're doing, you've got the community hub. Do we call that Studio 89 or Studio Point 89?
We call it Studio 89. Thank you.
Okay. And then Kind World Charity, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But the reason that we actually invited you to the Compassion Consortium is because you're a co-founder of Green Islam. And this is the interfaith part of our service where we talk about someone who is part of a religious or spiritual tradition to help us understand the teachings of that faith and how they juxtapose with kindness, compassion, vegetarian, vegan principles. So tell us about that in your life.
When I first went vegan, when I learned about what was happening to animals on the so-called humane farms, I thought to myself, I can't participate in this, as I'm sure so many of us here have had similar journeys. And I didn't quite understand why I felt that way until quite recently when I participated in a workshop with one Harvard professor, Michael Gantz. And it's a narrative change workshop. And he asked me, why do you believe what you believe? And I had to do some really deep digging. And every time I gave him an answer, he said, but why? And I would give him another answer and he'd say, but why? And what I realized is that the answer is right in front of me the whole time. The day I decided to become vegan, I was very reluctant actually. I had seen the short video on YouTube called Dairy is Scary. And I thought, this is vegan propaganda. No way could people do this to animals. This just doesn't seem right. Someone's trying to sell me something plant-based. I'm going to ask the dairy farmers of Canada. And so I joined their Facebook group. And I was already purchasing organic, what I thought was coming from small, cute dairy farmers who are taking care of their cows. And the more I chatted with them, the more reassured I became. And then one of them sent me a cattle rearing manual that is standardized for Canada. And she said, here you go, have a read through this. And I thought, I'm never going to read this. I feel really good about everything they've said to me. We love our cows, we love our animals. Their well-being is directly associated with our well-being. Why wouldn't we want to take care of them? And I thought, yes, exactly, of course. So I can carry on with my steady diet of Nutella, Twix, Kit Kat, Ferrero Rocher, Lindor, all the milk chocolate in the world. I enjoyed very, very much. And I thought, this is good. But for some reason, I clicked the file. It was a PDF file, and I started perusing and skimming through, and I came across a portion that very clinically spoke about how when the mothers are separated from the babies, when the babies are taken away, when the calves are taken away, the mothers become depressed, and that impacts their lactation levels. And so if you put all the mothers together, that they will comfort each other, and that will help their lactation levels. And I thought, oh, darn, I have to go vegan because in the Quran, it says animals are made in communities like you. And at the end, they will be called to their Lord, meaning they will testify in how we treat them. And so in that moment, I very reluctantly was like, oh, this is this is not okay. I cannot participate in this. And yet, I thought for the majority of my vegan life thus far, that I made that decision based on ethics. But what Michael Gans helped me see was that my ethics are actually grounded in my faith. They're grounded in the ideas of what I think ethics are based on what I learned about Islam that my mom taught me very specifically when I was a child. She would tell me about how God has created us and how God has created nature and how all of nature works together in harmony and how we are to take care of animals and how we are to take care of the environment, how you can't even pull on a blade of grass just for fun or pull a leaf just for fun. It's you have to respect creation. And so it really came together for me. That's why. That's the journey. Yeah.
That is beautiful. And yet, I think many people would say we just don't meet a lot of Muslim vegans. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, you know them in Green Islam.
Yes.
It doesn't seem to be, a big part of the population yet. So, what's happening there? What can you tell us?
Such a great question and something that I wrestle with on a daily basis. Muslims, like everyone else, so many folks are animal lovers, have pets in their homes, have such compassion for the pets in their lives, their family members, right? So why isn't that connecting to what are considered food animals? I think one of the greatest barriers we have, very similar to the Jewish community, is divine permission. The concept of halal is to most Muslims a concept of humane. Just like I wrongly believed once upon a time that what I was consuming was in alignment with spirituality, is what I find the vast majority of Muslims I come across believe about the halal concept. There are even videos online I've been watching recently, young influencers who, in the current political climate, are educating folks on Islam, and they'll say, well, halal means that the animals are, taken care of and they're not killed in front of one another. And there's so many rules to halal. And they genuinely believe. And these videos will have 17,000, 37,000, 900,000 likes and comments because this is what people truly believe. They do not know what the industry is doing today. Now, why don't they know what the industry is doing today? I think one reason is that since the tragedy of 9/11, Muslim countries have been simply ravaged. There is a situation of, life and death going on in so many Muslim countries. And so when a lot of folks are thinking about where do our donation dollars go, we're a very, very generous community. In fact, charity is one of the pillars of Islam. It's one of the five pillars. We are, in order to be Muslim and to be a good Muslim, you have to engage in charity. And so where do all these charity dollars go? They really go abroad to life and death situations of humans where humans are needing medical care or food, aid. That's typically where folks are thinking about first. And so I do think that there's quite a few barriers when it comes to the Muslim community. And one aspect is also that a lot of advocacy doesn't necessarily narrow in on the Muslim community. And so what happens is when Muslims come across vegan activists, they might see pigs on and their pigs are adorable and sweet and kind and amazing. And so I completely understand why they're on all of the collaterals, the logos of the animal rights organizations, or the flyers and the advocacy materials. But immediately Muslims go, that's not us. We don't eat pigs. We respect animals. We only eat halal. This is not a us problem. This is a them problem, right?
Mhm.
And so there are many such barriers that I find tend to keep Muslims from. And then there's the standard stuff, right? There's objections of health. People don't always understand that you can be healthy. A lot of vegan foods are, people don't know how to take vegan food and turn it into traditional food. Folks don't know how to be in community when altering to a vegan lifestyle. I know is very challenging for me. I used to cry big, big tears, just feeling really lonely after family parties or just, get-togethers with friends. And so it can be a lot to fully convert over.
Mm. And I think that's something that everybody goes through in
Hmm.
every tradition. And it's just, it almost seems like in the traditions where people are closer, it's more difficult. I
Hmm.
think that it's probably if somebody's going to go vegan and they just grew up in a completely, secular household and didn't do the family dinner thing much and all of that, it's an easier transition. So just to educate us a little bit, you mentioned the one pillar of charity. What are the other four?
The other four are prayer, of course, fasting during Ramadan, going to Hajj, which is a pilgrimage that we do, and believing that God is one and Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, was his last prophet.
And can you give us, and I know this is a huge question to ask when we have 3.5 minutes left, but just give us an understanding, those of us who do not know much about the Prophet Muhammad, just tell us if you were introducing him to us, what would you say?
And I'm going to introduce him particularly in association with what I know of him when it comes to animals and caring for the environment. What we believe as Muslims is that he would smile at ants and smile at trees. He smiled at everyone alongside humans. That smiling in Islam is actually also considered an act of charity, and charity in Islam is also considered an act of prayer. Um, Prophet Muhammad there's so many stories of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, who looking out for animals. There are stories of a sparrow that was distressed because some folks had taken the babies from the nest, and he said, "Who is distressing this sparrow?" Right? He spoke about this camel that looked emaciated and said, beware of the way you treat these creatures, like beware of God and his creation. He said, you don't have to. There's a man who asked him, I decided not to sacrifice the sheep, and he said, well, if you had mercy on the sheep, then God will have mercy on you. And he said this twice. And so there is a story after story. We're not allowed to separate baby calves from their mothers. So that moment I speak of when I was reading that cattle rearing manual, we are very explicitly told that you can take a little bit of milk after the calf has had their fill, and you cannot exhaust the mom's supply. We are not allowed to distress the animals in any way. We're not allowed to tie them down. There's so many rules. You can tie them, but not in a way like there are other sort of teachings that say, tie your camel, but really those are more metaphorical. We are supposed to have tremendous amounts of respect for animals to the extent that um, just like Judaism, in Islam, you are allowed to eat animals, but there are so many rules around how you can eat them that today's industry goes out the window. It's nearly impossible, right?
Yes.
So,
That's fascinating
yeah.
because I've heard that from some rabbis as well, that
Mm,
kosher rules are really just to make people vegetarian. So
yeah.
this is so fascinating, and there's so much more to talk with you about. So just in our last few seconds, because you are going to be in the vegan issues breakout room if people want to hear more from you, but just if you could give us a sentence to finish with on, you talk about empathy education based on neuroscience principles. Just give us a thought on what neuroscience has to do with empathy.
A few years ago, I met a philanthropist, just before COVID, actually. I met a philanthropist who said, I raise so much money and we donate millions of dollars every year. And we lift people out of poverty and we educate a whole bunch of youth. But how do we make sure that they don't end up becoming the next businessman who's exploiting the environment or the next slumlord, right? How do we actually create good people? And so that sent me on a journey to work to understand the human mind. And also because I thought when I first learned about, child exploitation on cocoa farms or human trafficking, I thought we would tell people and everybody would care. Everybody would say, this is a travesty. We will only buy fair trade chocolate and fair trade coffee, right? But that didn't happen. And then I thought when we learned about what we're doing to small farmers, our food supply through biotech companies, I thought people immediately would say, oh, we must only buy organic. And then when I learned about animals, I thought people would say, oh, we can't ever participate in the harm of animals. We must stop eating this. But people don't react that way. And
No.
so I was confounded as to why really good people that I know who are kind and loving and thoughtful and compassionate weren't aligning their values with their consumption habits. And even myself, there are many things that I have a blind spot to. My plastic footprint sometimes is just
Yeah.
too much, right?
Yeah,
And so
mine
how do
too.
we align
I
that?
I hate to stop you, Zara,
Oh,
but to
no,
keep
that's fine.
us on track, we need to
Yes, yes.
stop. For those of you who want more, there's that breakout room and all the other wonderful breakout rooms. So turning it back over to Jen, and thank you, Zara. That was stunning.